Section 401, Paragraph K. A subsection tucked into the Revenue Act of 1978, signed into law by Jimmy Carter, running to hundreds of pages, most of it forgotten. The paragraph that would eventually anchor an estimated $8 trillion in American defined contribution savings was not written to build retirements. It was written to restrain a tax maneuver being used by the highly compensated. Read that again, because the sequence matters. The outcome came first in history, and the intention came second, reversed from how it's told. Today, the 401k is the primary retirement vehicle for tens of millions of workers. But the account arrived before anyone decided it should be that. The job was assigned to the tool years after the tool already existed for something else. Here is the number that frames everything that follows. According to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, the median retirement account balance for American households approaching retirement age sits in the low six figures, not the seven figures the arithmetic of a 30-year retirement quietly requires. Two data points, drawn from the same population that refuse to reconcile. One says this is the plan, the other says the plan on its own numbers does not reach the finish line. That gap is not a story about lazy savers or bad discipline. Discipline is not the variable in question, the variable is design. And to see the design flaw, you have to go back to what paragraph K was actually restricting in 1978. In the late 1970s, high earners had found a way to defer part of their cash compensation into tax-advantaged arrangements, pushing income and the tax on it into the future. Congress grew uneasy. The 1978 provision was meant to set limits on that deferral, to write rules around who could do it and how much. It was, in plain terms, a fence. A regulatory boundary around an existing behavior of the well-paid. Nobody in that drafting room was designing a mass-market instrument to carry a schoolteacher or a machinist safely across 3 decades of old age. That use case did not exist yet. It would be invented, not legislated, invented by a single benefits consultant reading the fence and seeing a door. Consider what that means for the advice everyone now hears. Max out your 401k is delivered as settled wisdom. The responsible default, the thing you'd have to be reckless to ignore. And contributing is, in fact, reasonable. The tax deferral is real. The employer match is real money. None of that is the argument here. The argument is narrower and harder to dismiss. An account engineered as a supplemental deferral perk for executives was, over 2 decades, quietly promoted to the load-bearing wall of an entire nation's retirement, without ever being re-engineered for the weight. So the question is not whether the 401k helps, it plainly does. The question is the one that should keep a careful saver up at night. If this thing was never built to fund a retirement, if that was never its assignment, then how did an entire country come to bet its old age on it? Who made that bet, and why did it look, at the time, like the obvious move? The subsection was meant to restrict something. To see what, you have to read who was already using it. In 1980, a benefits consultant in the Philadelphia suburbs was working a problem for a client, a bank that wanted to reward its employees without simply handing over cash. Ted Benna was reading the tax code the way most people read a contract they suspect contains a loophole, slowly and against the grain. He landed on Section 401k, the fence Congress had built to restrain executive deferral, and he asked a question nobody drafting that provision had asked. What if the fence was actually a door? Here is what Benna saw that the legislators had not intended anyone to see. The subsection allowed an employee to defer part of their salary before tax. Nothing in the language said the employer couldn't add money on top of that deferral, a match. And nothing said this arrangement had to be limited to the highly compensated few the provision was written to police. Read plainly, the words permitted a structure. Workers set aside a slice of each paycheck untaxed. The company matched some portion, and the whole thing grew sheltered until withdrawal. That reading, in 1980 and formalized in 1981, is the moment the modern 401k was born, not in a Senate chamber, in a consultant's interpretation of a subsection meant to do something else entirely. And it was clever. It deserves to be called clever, not dismissed. Give the man his due. Think about what Benna's structure solved for the parties in front of him. The employee got a tax break they controlled, and a bonus from the employer they hadn't had before. The employer got a way to reward staff that was cheaper and more predictable than the alternative, and that shifted a burden off the company's books, a burden this video will name precisely in the next chapter. For a bank in 1980, this was not a scheme, it was a genuinely elegant answer to a real question about compensation. Benna understood this. By his own later accounts, he expected the idea to catch on modestly. A useful supplement, a smart perk layered on top of the retirement plans companies already offered. He was not, in 1980, standing over a blueprint for the primary retirement vehicle of tens of millions of Americans. He was solving a compensation puzzle for one client, using a tool he had found by reading sideways. This is where the good faith matters, because the story is usually told as either villainy or genius, and it is neither. Benna did something ingenious with the raw material available to him. The raw material was a tax provision about deferral. What he engineered from it was a better container for voluntary, tax-advantaged saving. A container with a match, a container an ordinary worker could actually use. On its own terms, the invention worked exactly as intended. It still does. The tax deferral is real. The match is real. Millions of retirements are meaningfully better for its existence. But notice the shape of what he actually built, because the shape is the whole point. Benna built a savings account with favorable tax treatment and an employer contribution. A container, a place to put money and let it compound. What a container does not contain is a promise about the endpoint. It says nothing about how long the money must last, nothing about what happens if the market falls in the wrong year, nothing about guaranteeing a check that arrives every month until death, regardless of how markets behave. Those weren't oversights, they simply weren't the assignment. You don't fault a well-made suitcase for not being a house. So the origin, correctly told, is a story of intelligent design for a narrow purpose. Benna built a clever tax tool, and it did the job he built it for. What he did not build, and to his credit, never claimed to build, was a replacement for a pension. Before the 401k became the default, most retirement money in America moved through a machine built on an entirely different principle. The contrast is the whole lesson. A defined benefit pension made a promise about the destination. A 401k makes a promise about the deposit. That single difference, destination versus deposit, is the fault line under everything that follows. Under a traditional pension, the employer told the worker, in effect, work here long enough, and we will pay you a fixed amount every month for the rest of your life, calculated from your years of service and your final salary. The worker did not choose investments. The worker did not watch a balance. The worker did not have to guess how long they would live and backsolve a withdrawal rate from it. The number that mattered was the monthly check, and the check was defined in advance, hence the name. Now look at how that machine actually worked underneath, because the mechanism is where the genius sat. A pension fund pooled thousands of workers together. Some would die at 68. Some would live to 97. Neither the employer nor the individual knew which. But across a large enough group, the average lifespan becomes predictable, even though no single life is. The fund didn't need to survive the longest life. It needed to fund the average one, and let the short lives and the long lives offset each other inside the pool. That is longevity pooling. The same principle that lets an insurer price a policy it can't predict for any one customer. The pension turned an unanswerable personal question, how long will I live, into a manageable actuarial one. How long will this group live on average? That is the thing the 401k cannot do, because there is no pool. There is only your account, your balance, and your own single unknowable lifespan. Consider what that shift moved off the company's books and onto the individuals. Inside a pension, the employer carried the investment risk. If markets underperformed, the company had to make up the shortfall to keep its promise. The employer carried the longevity risk. If retirees lived longer than expected, the fund still owed them. Those risks didn't vanish when the 401k rose. They were transferred. They landed, whole and undivided, on the one party in the arrangement least equipped to pool them, the individual worker, alone with a statement. And this is precisely why employers embraced the change, a point this video will unfold in full next. A defined benefit promise is a liability that sits on the corporate balance sheet for 40 years, exposed to markets and mortality the company cannot control. A matching contribution to an employee's account is a known cost, paid this quarter, closed this quarter. One is an open-ended obligation, the other is a line item. From a purely financial standpoint, the migration wasn't mysterious, it was rational. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has tracked the consequence for decades. The share of private sector workers covered by a traditional defined benefit pension has fallen dramatically since the early 1980s, while defined contribution coverage rose to take its place. A whole population was quietly moved from a system that promised a destination to a system that only records deposits, and most of them were never told the swap changed who carried the risk. None of this makes the pension flawless. Pensions failed when companies underfunded them, when firms went bankrupt, when the promise outran the money set aside to keep it. The old system had real failures, and the reforms that followed were not baseless. But strip it back to the mechanism, and one difference survives every caveat. A pension pooled longevity and paid a defined income for life. A 401k is a container that holds whatever you put in it and stops when it's empty. A pension made one promise. A 401k structurally cannot repeat. A check for as long as you live, however long that turns out to be. Follow the liability, not the ideology. When a company shifts from a pension to a 401k, no one has to hold a meeting to declare pensions dead. The decision makes itself, one balance sheet at a time, because of what each promise costs to keep. A defined benefit pension is an obligation that ages badly on the books. It sits there for decades, growing with every year of service a worker adds, sensitive to interest rates the company doesn't set, and to lifespans the company can't forecast. Accounting rules eventually required firms to carry the shortfall, the gap between what they'd promised and what the fund actually held, right out in the open, where investors and lenders could see it. A pension, in other words, is a debt that follows the company home. A 401k match is not. It is a cost incurred this quarter and closed this quarter. Nothing carries forward. Nothing compounds into a future liability. From a treasurer's chair, that is not a small improvement. That is the difference between an open door and a sealed one. There's a cleaner way to see it, and it comes from an older kind of promise entirely. In the 19th century, a company that wanted to reward long service might grant a worker a lifetime annuity paid straight from ongoing revenue, a pension in all but name, and a bet the firm would still be solvent in 40 years. When railroads and manufacturers made those promises at scale and then hit hard times, the promises broke, sometimes taking the pensions down with the company. The 20th century defined benefit plan was, in part, an attempt to fix that by setting money aside in advance, but it kept the shape of the old bargain. The employer still owned the endpoint. The 401k didn't reform that bargain, it ended it. It replaced a promise about the worker's future with a payment in the worker's present, and let the future become the worker's problem. Consider a manufacturer in 1985, an illustrative composite, not a specific firm, carrying pension obligations for a workforce living longer than the plan's original tables assumed. Every gain in life expectancy, every dip in the fund's returns, widened the liability. Now offer that same company an alternative. Match a portion of what each employee chooses to save, and be done. The obligation to a retiree who lives to 95 simply ceases to exist on the company's side of the ledger. The retiree still faces those 30 years. The company does not. For the firm, the arithmetic isn't cynical, it's overwhelming. A predictable, bounded present-tense cost will win against an open-ended, market-exposed future one nearly every time. And this is where a supplement quietly became the main event. Companies didn't set out to hand workers the entire retirement problem. They set out to shed a liability, and the 401k was the cleanest instrument for doing it. As defined benefit plans were frozen and closed through the 1980s and 1990s, the account that Benna had designed as a layer on top of a pension was left standing where the pension used to be. Not because anyone decided it was strong enough to stand alone, because the thing beside it was taken away, the default shifted by subtraction. Apply the lesson honestly. The employer's move was rational, even responsible toward shareholders. No villain is required. But notice what the rational move actually accomplished. Every risk the pension had absorbed on the company's behalf, the market's timing, the worker's lifespan, the guarantee of a monthly check, did not evaporate when the liability left the balance sheet. The risk didn't disappear in the switch. It moved onto the one person least equipped to price it. How long will your money need to last? Answer honestly, and you'll notice you can't. Nobody can. That single missing number is where the 401k's first structural gap opens. A pension never asked you to know. The 401k requires it, and then gives you no way to find out. Picture two savers who did everything right. Call them illustrative, because they are. Two composites, not real people. Each retires at 65 with the same balance, say the median for a household near retirement, in the low six figures, drawn from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances. Same portfolio, same discipline, same withdrawal plan, on paper identical retirements. The first one dies at 78, 13 years of spending. The money holds comfortably. There's even a remainder for the estate. By every measure, the plan worked. The second one lives to 96, 31 years of spending from the same starting pile. Somewhere in her middle 80s, the arithmetic she couldn't see at 65 catches up with her. The account that funded a comfortable 13 years cannot stretch to 31 at the same rate. She doesn't run out because she was careless. She runs out because she lived. That is the comparison that should stop a careful saver cold. Same balance, same behavior, same market, and the outcomes diverge completely, decided by a variable neither saver controls and neither can know in advance. The endpoint. The one input the entire withdrawal calculation depends on, and the one input that is unknowable until it's too late to plan around it. Here is the lesson underneath the two lives. A defined benefit pension solved this exact problem, not by predicting your lifespan, but by refusing to depend on it. It pooled thousands of workers and paid each one a check for as long as they lived, letting the short lives and the long lives balance inside the group. The person who reaches 96 is fully covered, funded quietly by the pool, not by her own foresight. The pension made longevity somebody else's math. The 401k has no pool, it has a balance, and a balance by its nature has a bottom. It can be large, it can be well managed, it can compound for 40 years, but it cannot generate a payment guaranteed to continue past the moment the money is gone. There is no mechanism inside the account that says, keep paying, regardless of how long she lives. That sentence simply cannot be written into a container. This is not a flaw in how anyone saved, it's a flaw in what the tool is. You can max the contribution every year, capture every dollar of the match, choose low-cost funds, never panic sell, and still face the one question the account has no answer for. How long? Answer 78, and you saved too much. Answer 96, and you saved too little. And you have to answer it at 65, blind, with the rest of your life riding on the guess. So longevity risk isn't a warning about spending too fast, it's structural. The 401k transfers the unknowable endpoint from an actuarial pool that could absorb it to a single individual who cannot. That transfer is the first of the three gaps this video promised to name. The first thing, a defined contribution account has no machinery to close. Sit with that for a moment, because most retirement planning quietly assumes the endpoint away. It picks a number, 90-95, and calls it prudent. But a number you chose is not a guarantee, it's a hope wearing a spreadsheet. And longevity is only the first gap. It's the one you can at least see coming, even if you can't measure it. The second gap is stranger and more unfair, because it doesn't care how much you saved or how long you live. It can take two savers with identical balances, identical plans, identical lifespans, and leave one comfortable and the other broke, based on nothing but the year each happened to retire. Two savers, same balance, same plan, same lifespan, and one dies comfortable while the other runs out. The only difference between them is the year each stopped working. Not the amount, not the discipline, the year. Start with the number that makes people relax, the average. Over the last century, a diversified stock portfolio has returned somewhere around 7% a year after inflation, by most long-run measures. Financial planning leans on that figure constantly. Retire with a reasonable balance, withdraw a modest percentage. Let the average do the work, and the money should last. On a spreadsheet, the average is reassuring. It is also, for a retiree, close to meaningless. Here is what the average hides. Nobody retires into an average. They retire into a specific sequence of years. This year's return, then next year's, then the one after, in the exact order the calendar hands them. And when you are pulling money out every month, the order of those returns is not a footnote. It can decide the entire outcome. This is sequence of returns risk, and it is the second gap. Recalculate with two composite retirees, illustrative, not real. Both retire at 65 with the same balance, say $500,000. Both withdraw the same amount each year, adjusted for inflation. Both earn the exact same average return over 30 years. Same average. The only thing different is the order the returns arrive in. The first retiree meets a bad market early. In her first 3 years, the portfolio drops sharply, the kind of decline that has happened repeatedly in living memory. She is selling shares to fund her withdrawals while those shares are depressed, locking in losses that a working saver would simply have waited out. Every dollar she takes in a down year is a dollar that can never recover. By the time markets rebound, there is less money left to rebound. The strong years that follow lift a smaller pile. She runs low in her early 80s. The second retiree gets the identical returns in reverse. His good years come first. His portfolio grows before he draws it down much, building a cushion of gains early. When the bad years finally arrive, they land on a larger balance that can absorb them. Same withdrawals, same average, same lifespan. He dies with money to spare. Read that carefully, because it violates the intuition everyone brings to investing. We are taught that the long-run average is what matters, that if you just capture the market's return over decades, you are fine. That is true while you are accumulating. It becomes false the moment you start withdrawing. In retirement, two portfolios with the identical 30-year average can end in opposite places, and the deciding factor is not skill, not patience, not the number on the statement. It is timing the retiree did not choose and could not have chosen. Notice what this does to the standard advice. Stay the course works when you have a course left to stay. A retiree hit by a downturn in year 2 does not have decades to wait for recovery. She has withdrawals due next month. The very discipline that built the balance offers no protection against the calendar that spends it. And no amount of contribution, no perfect fund selection, no fee optimization touches this. The account does not know or care what year you opened its door to draw from it. A pension carried none of this. The check was defined in advance, paid from a pool that smoothed every market across thousands of retirees and 40 years of returns. The retiree who left in a crash year and the one who left in a boom year received the same monthly amount. The fund absorbed the timing. The individual never felt it. The sequence was somebody else's problem, priced across a group large enough that no single year could break it. Strip it to the mechanism and the unfairness is complete. Two people who did everything the same, separated only by a date on a calendar they had no control over, arriving at opposite ends of old age. A pension never asked what year you retired in. A 401k makes it one of the most important numbers of your life. A 401k will never send you a check. Read that plainly, because it is the whole matter. The account can grow, compound, survive crashes, and reach a number that looks like enough. And on the day you stop working, it does not begin paying you. It does not know how. Nothing inside it produces income. It produces a balance, and then it hands you the balance and steps back. That is the difference nobody warns a saver about until the withdrawals begin. A pension paid. The check arrived on the first of the month, defined in advance, and it kept arriving whether markets rose or fell, whether you lived to 70 or 100. The retiree's only job was to cash it. The 401k inverts that entirely. It gives you a pile and a decision. How much to take, how often, for how long, and it makes that decision yours forever, month after month, until either you or the money runs out. Notice what has quietly happened. The pension didn't just fund a retirement, it converted savings into income, automatically, for life. That conversion was the point of the whole machine. The 401k performs the first half, the saving, and then abandons the second half, the part that turns a number into a livable paycheck. It leaves the hardest financial task most people will ever face, decumulation, sitting unassigned on the kitchen table. And this is the mechanism the account has no part for. To pay a guaranteed income for life, you need a pool. thousands of people, so the short lives fund the long ones. Or you need a reserve willing to make up any shortfall, an insurer or an employer standing behind the promise. A 401k has neither. It is one account, one owner, one balance, exposed to one lifespan and one sequence of markets. There is no counterparty on the other side of the promise, because there is no promise. There is only your money and your arithmetic. So the retiree becomes, involuntarily, their own pension actuary. They must estimate a lifespan they cannot know, forecast returns they do not control, set a withdrawal rate, and then adjust it in real time as markets move and years pass. A calculation entire actuarial departments once performed with mortality tables and reserve funds, now handed to a 68-year-old with a spreadsheet and a hope. Most people are not equipped for this. Almost no one is. It is not a failure of intelligence. It is a task the tool was never meant to delegate to an individual. This is the third gap, and it is the one that ties the other two together. Longevity risk is the unknown endpoint. Sequence risk is the unlucky timing. Both would be survivable if the account did what a pension did, pay a floor of guaranteed income regardless of either, but it doesn't. The missing guaranteed income layer is not one problem among three. It is the absence that makes the first two dangerous. A monthly check for life would have absorbed the long lifespan and smoothed the bad market. The 401k offers no such floor, so both risks land directly on the retiree, with nothing underneath to catch them. Name it cleanly, because this closes the question this act has been circling. Which risk does a 401k have no mechanism to absorb? The risk of the paycheck itself ending. The account can hold market risk with diversification and time. It cannot hold longevity. It cannot hold sequence, and above all, it cannot manufacture the one thing a retirement actually runs on: income that does not stop. That machinery was never installed. It was never the assignment. The account hands you a lump sum and a wish of good luck. Now the numbers say exactly how far that luck goes, and how much a real 30-year retirement was quietly costing all along. Put the two numbers side by side and the discomfort is immediate. On one side, what Americans have actually saved. On the other, what a 30-year retirement actually costs. The account most workers are told to trust was never asked to reconcile those two figures. And when you force it to, the arithmetic simply refuses. Start with what people have. According to the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances and Vanguard's How America Saves report, the median 401k balance for households approaching retirement age sits in the low six figures, somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $200,000, depending on the year and the survey. Not the average. The average is dragged upward by a small number of very large accounts. The median, the middle household, the one that half the country falls below, is the honest figure, and the honest figure is roughly $100,000 to $200,000. Now the bill. Take a retiree who needs $40,000 a year from their savings on top of Social Security to live modestly, not lavishly, modestly. Over 30 years, ignoring inflation entirely, that is $1.2 million. Add inflation at historical rates and the true figure climbs past that with room to spare. Set the withdrawal rate at the conventional 4%, and funding $40,000 a year requires a starting balance near $1 million. Hold those together. The tool holds $100,000 to $200,000. The job requires something close to $1 million. That is not a rounding error. That is a gap of 5 to 8 times, sitting at the center of the country's primary retirement plan, in plain sight, in the government's own data. So the loop opens on its own. How can the account an entire nation was told to lean on hold so little? How does the vehicle assigned to carry old age arrive at the finish line with a fifth of the fare? Here is where the tension has to break, because the obvious answer is the wrong one. The obvious answer is that people failed to save, that they were undisciplined, distracted, careless with the match. That story is comforting in a bleak way, because it means the fix is simply to try harder. But the data does not support it. The savers in that median did contribute. Many captured the match. Many chose low-cost funds and never panic sold. They did, in aggregate, roughly what they were told to do, and they still landed at $100,000 to $200,000. That is the relief hidden inside the bad number. If the shortfall were a discipline problem, it would indict the saver. It does not. Because when you run the arithmetic forward, even a diligent worker one who contributes steadily for 30 years, at ordinary wages, capturing an ordinary match, arrives at retirement with a balance the median describes accurately. The median is not a portrait of failure, it is a portrait of the system working as designed, for people doing what the system asked. The gap is not what undisciplined savers produce, it is what the tool produces when used correctly. And now the revelation, which reframes everything that came before it. A 5 to 8 times gap that persists across tens of millions of diligent savers is not a behavioral failure. Behavior varies, discipline varies. But this gap does not vary. It shows up in the median, in the survey, year after year, in the accounts of people who did it right. When a shortfall is that consistent across that many people doing the correct thing, it is no longer a failure of the people, it is a property of the machine. Look back at what the last 4 chapters established and it locks into place. Longevity the account cannot pool, sequence risk it cannot smooth, guaranteed income it cannot manufacture. The balance falls short because a container was assigned a job that requires a pension, and a container filled correctly still only holds what a container holds. Which means the gap is not a savings failure, it is a design mismatch, and design mismatches, unlike character flaws, have design fixes. But someone will push back, and the pushback deserves a fair hearing, because it is the strongest thing anyone can say in the 401k's defense. It goes like this: forget the median. The median is dragged down by people who started late, who contributed little, who cashed out between jobs. Run the numbers on a saver who does it perfectly, maxes the contribution every year, captures the full match, starts at 25, invests in low-cost index funds, never touches it for 40 years, and the account does reach $1 million. More, in good decades. The gap in the last chapter, the objection says, is a gap in behavior, not in design. Fix the behavior and the tool works. Steelman it fully, because it is largely true. The federal contribution limit, compounded over 4 decades at historical equity returns, genuinely can produce a 7-figure balance. It has, for a real and growing slice of disciplined, higher earnings savers. Vanguard's own data shows a meaningful tail of accounts above $1 million. The arithmetic is not fantasy. A worker who threads every needle, high enough income to max out, 40 uninterrupted years, no early withdrawals, no panic selling in 2008 or 2020, can arrive at 65 with a pile that, on paper, funds the retirement. Concede all of it. The objection is not stupid. It is the best case for the tool, honestly stated. Now watch what the best case still cannot do, and here the earlier chapters return to collect their debt. Grant the $1 million saver everything. He threaded every needle. And he still walks up to the exact same 3 gaps, unchanged, because the gaps were never about the size of the balance. Take the counterexample the accumulation story never accounts for. 2 savers reach 65 with an identical, flawless $1 million. Same portfolio, same discipline, same perfect 40-year run. The first retires in a year the market falls hard for 3 straight years while she draws income, sequence risk from Chapter 6, and by her early 80s, the million is thin. The second retires into a calm decade and dies at 96 comfortable, same million. Same behavior, opposite endings. The 7-figure balance did not close the sequence gap. It cannot. A larger container is still a container. And the longevity question is worse for the $1 million saver, not better, because he has more to lose. He still cannot know if he needs the money to last 13 years or 3. He still has no pool. He still gets no check that continues past the day the account empties. $1 million withdrawn at 4% is $40,000 a year, until a long life or a bad sequence proves 4% was too much, and there is no floor underneath to catch the fall. The guaranteed income layer is still missing. It was never a function of how much you saved. It was a function of what the tool is. So the objection is right about accumulation and wrong about the thing that matters. Yes, disciplined saving builds a large balance. No, a large balance does not solve longevity, sequence, or the absence of guaranteed income, because those were never savings problems. They are structural, and structure does not yield to a bigger number. Which is why the honest verdict is not that the 401k fails. It is that it succeeds at exactly one job. building a balance, and gets asked to do 3 others it has no machinery for. The account can be excellent. It can be the best tax-advantaged accumulation tool most people will ever touch. It is excellent, as long as you stop asking it to be the whole plan. The image is old enough that most people have stopped noticing it. A 3-legged stool. Balance a retirement on it and the point becomes literal. 1 leg is what you saved. 1 leg is what the government promises. 1 leg is what someone else guarantees to pay you for life. Remove any single leg and the seat doesn't wobble. It drops. And for most of a generation, financial advice has quietly sanded 2 of the legs down to stubs, then handed the saver a stool with 1 full-length support and told them to sit. The 401k is that 1 leg. The whole video has been an argument for what kind of leg it is. An accumulation leg. Excellent at building a balance, structurally unable to pool longevity, smooth sequence, or manufacture income that never stops. Framed as the stool, it fails. Framed as 1 leg, it's exactly what it was built to be. The reframing is not a downgrade of the account. It is a promotion of the other 2 legs back into view. Look at the 2nd leg, and notice it's already there, already yours, and routinely ignored in the arithmetic. Social Security is not a savings balance. It is a defined, inflation-adjusted, guaranteed monthly check that arrives regardless of how markets behave or how long you live. Read that against the 3 gaps and something clicks. It pays for life, longevity pooling, done at the scale of a nation. It pays the same in a crash year as in a boom year. Sequence risk, absorbed. It is, structurally, a pension. The country did not abolish the pension when defined benefit plans faded. It kept one universal and mandatory, and most savers file it under taxes rather than under retirement income. Here's the historical parallel worth sitting with. When the defined benefit pension was the norm, the American retirees stood on 2 guaranteed legs, an employer pension and Social Security, with personal savings as a modest 3rd. 2 legs made a promise about the destination. The 3rd was extra. The 401k migration didn't add a leg. It removed the sturdiest one and enlarged the flimsiest, then relabeled the flimsy one as the foundation. The stool didn't gain support. It lost a leg and got told the remaining one had grown strong enough to compensate. It hadn't. A leg cannot become a stool by being asked to. Which is why the corrected model doesn't ask the 401k to do more. It asks it to do less. It's one job, accumulation, and rebuilds the missing legs deliberately. Social Security is the first guaranteed leg, and the age at which a retiree claims it changes its size materially. The 3rd leg is the one the private market still sells. A guaranteed income stream you buy. A way to convert part of the balance into a check that behaves like the pension the 401k replaced. Not the whole balance, a floor. Enough that longevity and sequence land on a guarantee instead of on a spreadsheet. The reflection lands here. The savers who feel behind were never failing at retirement. They were succeeding at 1/3 of it and being told it was the whole. The relief in that is real. The tool works, the discipline worked, and the fix is not to save frantically harder, but to rebuild 2 legs that were quietly removed. The account is a good leg. Name the other 2 and the stool stands. But naming the legs is the easy part. Anyone can say Social Security and guaranteed income in a sentence. The hard part, the part almost no one is actually taught, is the mechanics of the 3rd leg. How you make a lump sum behave like a pension, how much of it to convert, and when. That is where the real work of a retirement gets done. Watch what a newly retired couple actually does with a 401k balance in the first 90 days, and you see the whole problem in miniature. They roll the account somewhere, they read about withdrawal rates, and then they sit, month after month, deciding by hand how much to move from a shrinking pile into a checking account, inventing a paycheck their working life used to hand them automatically. Nobody taught them the mechanics because the mechanics were the pension's job and the pension is gone. So the corrected model isn't a slogan. It's a sequence of decisions, and the order of them matters more than almost anyone is told. Start with the leg that costs nothing to build and is routinely mistimed, Social Security. Claiming age is not a formality, it is a purchase. A retiree who claims at 62 locks in a permanently smaller check. One who delays towards 70 receives a substantially larger one, adjusted for inflation, paid for life. The Social Security Administration's own figures put the difference between the earliest and latest claim at roughly 75 to 80% more in monthly benefit. Compare two composite retirees, illustrative not real, with identical savings. The first claims at 62 and leans hard on the 401k early to bridge nothing in particular. The second spends down part of the 401k deliberately in her 60s, precisely so she can delay Social Security to 70, converting a chunk of a market-exposed balance into a larger guaranteed check that will never run out. Same starting money. One has bought herself a bigger lifelong floor. The other has spent the same dollars and bought nothing permanent. That is the maneuver the accumulation story never mentions. The 401k's highest use late in life may be to purchase a larger Social Security benefit by funding the delay. Now the third leg, the one the private market still sells, and the one that closes this act's loop. If the account was only ever one leg, where are the other two? The second is the government's guaranteed check. The third is a guarantee you build yourself by converting part of the balance into a private income stream, an annuitized floor. A retiree takes a slice of the balance, not the whole thing, and exchanges it for a contract that pays a fixed amount for life, however long that life runs. The pool the 401k never had, bought back one policy at a time from an insurer that does have one. Set the two approaches beside each other and the difference is stark. The first retiree keeps the entire balance invested and withdraws by feel, exposed fully to longevity and sequence, the two gaps this video named. The second carves off enough to guarantee a floor, Social Security plus a private income stream covering the non-negotiable costs, food, shelter, medicine. On top of that floor, the remaining 401k balance stays invested for everything else: travel, gifts, the good years. If markets fall, the floor holds. If she lives to 96, the floor holds. The account is no longer asked to be the whole retirement. It sits back into its one competent job: growth on top of a guarantee. Notice what the expansion reveals. The three-legged stool was never a metaphor about diversification. It was a division of labor. Social Security absorbs longevity at national scale. A private income stream absorbs it for the piece the government's check doesn't cover. And the 401k does the one thing it was engineered to do: accumulate and then hand a portion of that accumulation to the two legs that can turn it into income that doesn't stop. The savers who felt behind were carrying a container and calling it a house. The container was fine. It just needed the other two legs rebuilt around it, deliberately, in the right order. Which leaves exactly one question standing, the one printed in the title from the very first second. Name a suitcase, a house, and you will still stand in the rain. That is, in the end, the entire story of the 401k. Not a fraud, not a failure, but a category error committed at the scale of a country. The account did exactly what it was built to do. The mistake was never in the tool, it was in the sentence spoken over it. So return, one last time, to the question that is run underneath every chapter. If the 401k was never built to fund a retirement, why did an entire country bet its old age on it? By now the answer is not a mystery. Nobody placed the bet. It was assembled by subtraction. Section 401k arrived in the Revenue Act of 1978 as a fence around executive deferral. Ted Benna, in 1980, read the fence as a door and built a clever savings container with a match on top. Employers, following the liability and not any ideology, closed their pensions through the 1980s and 1990s because an open-ended promise costs more than a present-tense payment. And when the pension was taken away, the container Benna designed to sit beside it was left standing where it used to be, not chosen as a foundation, left as one. The whole country woke up leaning on a leg and calling it a stool, and no single person ever decided it should be that way. That is the resolution, and it is quieter than the panic the numbers first invite. The 5 to 8 times gap between the median balance and the true cost of a 30-year retirement is not a verdict on the saver. The Federal Reserve's own survey shows diligent people doing roughly what they were told, arriving at the same shortfall, because a container filled correctly still only holds what a container holds. The gap is a property of the machine, and machines with the wrong assignment get reassigned. Here is the corrected mental model, stated plainly enough to carry out of this video and use. The 401k is one excellent leg. the best tax-advantaged accumulation tool most people will ever touch, and worth every dollar of the contribution and the match. It is not the stool. The second leg already exists. Social Security, a guaranteed, inflation-adjusted check for life, which is a pension by another name, and whose value can be materially enlarged by delaying the claim. The third leg is one you build, converting a portion of the balance, not the whole of it, into a guaranteed income stream that behaves like the pension the account replaced. A floor for longevity and sequence, growth on top for the good years. 3 legs, a division of labor, each doing the one job it can actually do. The relief in that is worth pausing on. The saver who felt behind was not behind at succeeding. They were succeeding at 1/3 of the task and being told it was the whole. The fix is not to save frantically harder against an impossible number. It is to stop asking one leg to be 3 and to rebuild the other 2 deliberately in the right order, which is work a person can actually do, with time and clear eyes, rather than a failure they must carry. None of this means the account was a mistake. Wealth is built to last, and the 401k genuinely helps it last, as accumulation, doing what it was engineered to do, honestly named at last. The error was never in paragraph K. It was in the story a country told itself about a suitcase, and then repeated so often that nobody stopped to check whether it was a house. The account was never the problem, the story told about it was. This is education, not personalized advice.